The stagecoach rattled into Nogales, Arizona on a blistering afternoon in June 1882, carrying a woman whose hands wouldn't stop trembling no matter how tightly she clasped them in her lap. Eleanor Olivia Preston pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the sun-baked buildings emerge from the shimmering heat like a mirage that refused to disappear. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to meet a man she knew only through carefully worded letters, and the secret she carried felt heavier with every mile that brought her closer to him. The driver called out their arrival, and Eleanor smoothed down her travel-worn dress, acutely aware of the dust coating every inch of fabric. She had one good dress packed in her trunk, saved for the wedding she hoped would still happen once she found the courage to tell Zachary Fletcher the truth. The truth about San Francisco. The truth about why a respectable woman of 24 would answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride and travel across hostile territory to marry a stranger. As she stepped down from the stagecoach, the heat hit her like a physical force. Nogales sat right on the border with Mexico, and the air carried the scent of mesquite and dust, and something indefinably foreign. Her eyes scanned the handful of people gathered near the general store, searching for a man who matched the description in his letters. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, 30 years old rancher. Miss Preston, the voice came from her left, deep and uncertain. Eleanor turned and felt her breath catch. Zachary Fletcher stood with his hat in his hands, squinting against the sun, and he was nothing like she had imagined. The letters had mentioned his appearance in passing, but they hadn't prepared her for the way he carried himself, the quiet strength evident in every line of his body, or the kindness in his weathered face. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his sun-bronzed skin spoke of years working under this relentless sky. "Mr. Fletcher," she managed, her voice hoarse from the journey, "please call me Zachary." He stepped forward, taking her travel bag with an easy courtesy. "Or Zach, if you prefer. The wagon is just over there. I thought you might want to get cleaned up at the boarding house before we talk about arrangements." The consideration in his words made her throat tighten. In San Francisco, men hadn't been considerate. They had been demanding, cruel, and when she had finally escaped that life, she had sworn never to let another man have power over her again. Yet here she was, having placed her fate entirely in the hands of a stranger because staying in California had become impossible. "That would be kind, thank you." Eleanor followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. When he offered his hand to help her up, she hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was calloused and warm, and he released her the moment she was settled, respecting the boundaries between them. As they drove through town, Zachary pointed out the various establishments. The general store, the saloon, the church where the traveling preacher held services every other Sunday, the small schoolhouse. Nogales was rough and dusty, but Eleanor could see the bones of something solid here, a community building itself in hard country. "The ranch is about 6 miles out," Zachary explained, his eyes on the road ahead. "Nothing fancy, but the house is sound and the land is good for cattle. I have 3 hands who help with the work. Decent men, but I want you to know they live in the bunkhouse a good distance from the main house. You would have privacy and safety." "I appreciate that." Eleanor studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. He was nervous too, she realized. This arrangement was as strange for him as it was for her. "Miss Preston, I want to be clear about something." Zachary pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a neat boarding house with a hand-painted sign. "I know this situation is not what either of us might have hoped for in life, but I give you my word that I will treat you with respect." If you decide after a few days that you cannot go through with the marriage, I will pay for your passage back to San Francisco or wherever else you want to go. No questions asked, no obligations. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "That is very decent of you, Mr. Fletcher." "Zachary," he corrected gently, "and it is only right. Marriage should be a partnership, not a prison." If only he knew how those words resonated. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon before he could help her, needing a moment to compose herself. "I will need to collect my trunk. I will bring it in. Mrs. Henley runs the boarding house. She is expecting you." Zachary hesitated, then added, "I thought we might have supper together tomorrow evening if you are willing. Give you time to rest and think things over. Tomorrow would be fine." Eleanor watched him unload her battered trunk with ease, his movements efficient and practiced. Everything about Zachary Fletcher spoke of reliability and steadiness, qualities that had been entirely absent from her life in San Francisco. When he had placed her trunk on the boarding house porch and tipped his hat in farewell, she felt an unexpected pang of regret watching him drive away. Mrs. Henley proved to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who showed Eleanor to a small but clean room and promised hot water for a bath within the hour. Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the bed and let herself feel the weight of exhaustion. The journey from San Francisco had taken 3 weeks, involving trains, stage coaches, and one terrifying stretch where Apache raiders had been spotted near the route. She had spent those weeks rehearsing what she would say to Zachary, how she would explain her past, but now that she had met him, the words seemed even more impossible to speak. The hot bath helped ease some of the tension from her body, and Eleanor carefully unpacked her good dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She brushed out her honey blonde hair until it shone, then braided it simply. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror, she tried to see what Zachary had seen. She was not beautiful, not in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong, her hands too rough from work, but her eyes were clear, and there was determination in the set of her jaw. That evening, Mrs. Henley invited Eleanor to share supper with her and 2 other boarders, a pair of miners passing through on their way to new claims. The conversation was pleasant and impersonal, and Eleanor was grateful not to have to explain herself. After the meal, she retired to her room and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying that first meeting with Zachary, the kindness in his offer to let her leave if she chose. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Eleanor helped Mrs. Henley with breakfast dishes, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. The older woman chatted about Nogales gossip and mentioned Zachary Fletcher several times, always with approval. "Lost his parents 5 years back to cholera," Mrs. Henley confided as she dried a plate. "Been running that ranch alone ever since, except for his hired hands. Good man, Zachary Fletcher, fair and honest. Any woman would be lucky to have him." The words settled uncomfortably in Eleanor's chest. She did not feel lucky, she felt like a fraud. Zachary arrived promptly at 6 that evening, cleaned up and wearing what was clearly his best shirt. He took Eleanor to the only restaurant in Nogales, a modest establishment run by a Mexican family who served excellent food. Over plates of enchiladas and beans, they talked carefully, feeling their way through the minefield of getting to know a stranger who might become a spouse. Zachary told her about his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in this harsh climate, his hopes to expand the herd over the next few years. He spoke of his parents with obvious affection, describing how they had staked their claim when Arizona was even wilder than it was now. Eleanor listened, asking questions, and found herself genuinely interested in his stories. When he turned the conversation to her, Eleanor chose her words carefully. She told him about growing up in Ohio, her parents dying when she was 17, her move to San Francisco to live with an aunt. All of this was true. What she did not mention was what had happened after her aunt died 2 years later, leaving Eleanor alone in a city that devoured young women without protection or means. "What made you decide to answer my advertisement?" Zachary asked, his dark eyes curious but not prying. "San Francisco became difficult," Eleanor said slowly. "I had few prospects and fewer friends. The idea of a fresh start appealed to me." It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said all evening, even if it omitted the darkest parts of the story. Zachary nodded as if he understood, though he could not possibly understand the depths of what she was not saying. "This country is good for fresh starts," he said. "Half the people in Nogales are running from something or toward something. Not much judgment here, long as you are willing to work and deal square with folks." The comment made Eleanor's heart pound. Was he hinting that he suspected something? But his expression remained open and friendly, without suspicion. They finished the meal with lighter conversation about the town and its characters, and when Zachary drove her back to the boarding house, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of something she had not expected to feel again: hope. "I enjoyed this evening," Zachary said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Would you like to see the ranch tomorrow? No pressure about decisions. I just thought you might want to know what you would be considering." "I would like that very much." That night, Eleanor lay awake and let herself imagine a life at the Fletcher Ranch. Cooking in a kitchen that belonged to her, tending a garden, sharing meals with a man who treated her with respect. It seemed almost too good to be possible, and the fear of losing it before she even had it gnawed at her resolve. She had to tell him the truth. The longer she waited, the worse it would be. But not yet. Not until she knew whether this fragile possibility could become real. Zachary arrived mid-morning with the wagon, and they set out across the sun-scorched landscape. The road was rough but well-traveled, and Zachary drove with the ease of someone who had made this journey thousands of times. He pointed out landmarks: a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that ran with water during the brief rainy season, the boundary markers of his property. The ranch house came into view after an hour of driving, and Eleanor felt her breath catch again. It was not grand, just a solid adobe structure with a covered porch and shuttered windows to keep out the heat, but it looked like a home. Outbuildings dotted the property: a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals with several horses. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the sparse grassland. "It is not much," Zachary said, a hint of apology in his voice. "It is beautiful," Eleanor replied honestly. After the cramped, filthy rooms she had endured in San Francisco, this place looked like paradise. Zachary showed her around with obvious pride. The house had 4 rooms: a main living area with a fireplace and kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small room he used for storing supplies. Everything was neat and clean, if Spartan. The walls were thick adobe, keeping the interior surprisingly cool despite the heat outside. "If you stayed, the larger bedroom would be yours," Zachary said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I would take the smaller one unless things changed between us. I do not expect anything you are not ready to give freely." The consideration in his words made Eleanor want to weep. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the harsh, beautiful landscape. "Why did you advertise for a bride, Zachary? Surely there are women in town who would be interested." She heard him shift behind her. "Not many single women in Nogales, and those who are here have their pick of men. I am 30 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years building this ranch back up after my parents passed. There has not been time for courting, even if I was any good at it. but the ranch is stable now and this house feels too quiet." He paused, then added softly, "I want a family, Eleanor. Children to leave this land to, a partner to share the work and the rewards. Maybe that is too practical a reason for marriage, but it is the truth." Eleanor turned to face him. "I think honesty is more romantic than pretty words that do not mean anything." Their eyes met across the small room, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared loneliness and hope. Zachary smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face, and Eleanor found herself smiling back. The sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Zachary went to the door as 3 riders came into the yard. "My hands," he explained. "Come meet them." The ranch hands proved to be a diverse group. Robert was an older man with graying hair and a quiet dignity, a former soldier who had settled in Arizona after his service ended. Miguel was younger, maybe 25, with an easy grin and ready laugh. The third man, James, was somewhere in between, solid and taciturn. All 3 greeted Eleanor with respect and carefully averted eyes, as if afraid to presume anything about her presence. "Miss Preston is considering my proposal of marriage," Zachary said plainly. "If she accepts, she will be mistress of this ranch, and I expect her to be treated as such." "Yes, sir," they chorused, and Eleanor saw approval in Robert's weathered face. After the men returned to their work, Zachary and Eleanor spent the afternoon talking on the porch, watching the cattle in the distance and the hawks circling in the cloudless sky. Zachary spoke of his plans for the ranch, asking her opinion on various improvements. Eleanor found herself drawn into the conversation, suggesting ideas for a vegetable garden, chickens for eggs, perhaps a few pigs. Zachary listened to everything she said with genuine interest, and several times he nodded and said he had not thought of that, but it was a good idea. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Zachary drove Eleanor back to town. The silence between them was comfortable now, companionable. When they reached the boarding house, Zachary helped her down and said, "I will be in town tomorrow for supplies. May I call on you in the afternoon? Please do." "Eleanor," he said, and the use of her first name sent warmth through her chest. "I know we have only known each other a few days, but I want you to know that I think this could work between us. I think we could build something good together." The hope in his voice was almost her undoing. Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes. "Zachary, there are things about my past that you should know before you make any promises." His expression grew serious. "We all have pasts, Eleanor. What matters is who we choose to be going forward. You say that now, but you do not know what I need to tell you." Zachary studied her face for a long moment. "Then tell me when you are ready. But know this, I am not a man who judges easily, and I believe in second chances. Whatever you think might change my mind about you, I doubt it will." He left her with those words, and Eleanor stood on the porch long after the wagon disappeared from view. He was making it so hard to believe that the truth would destroy everything, but she knew better. Men like Zachary Fletcher, decent men who wanted respectable wives, did not marry women who had worked in brothels. It did not matter that she had been desperate, that starvation and homelessness had been her only alternatives, that she had saved every penny for 2 years to escape. Society had strict rules about fallen women, and those rules did not include redemption or understanding. That night, Eleanor made her decision. She would tell Zachary the truth tomorrow. If he rejected her, at least she would have the memory of these few days when she had been treated with kindness and respect. If, by some miracle, he did not reject her, then perhaps there really could be fresh starts in this harsh, beautiful territory. The next afternoon, Eleanor dressed in her good blue dress and waited for Zachary with her stomach in knots. When he arrived, she asked if they could walk, and he offered his arm without question. They strolled through Nogales, past the church and the general store, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert. "You are very quiet today," Zachary observed. "I need to tell you something." Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. "Something about my time in San Francisco. After that, if you want me to leave, I will understand completely." Zachary's expression grew guarded, but he nodded. "I am listening." The words were impossibly hard to form. Eleanor looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. "After my aunt died, I had no money and no way to earn a respectable living. I tried to find work as a seamstress, a laundress, anything honest. But there were too many women and not enough jobs, and the positions that were available paid so little I could not afford even a room in the worst boarding house." She took a shaky breath. "I ended up in a brothel, Zachary. For 2 years. That was my life. I am not proud of it, and if I could change the past, I would. But I cannot. I can only be honest with you now and let you decide if you can accept it." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Eleanor kept her eyes on the ground, waiting for Zachary to walk away, to tell her she was not welcome at his ranch or in his life. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Look at me, Eleanor." She forced herself to raise her head. Zachary's face was tight with some strong feeling, but it was not disgust or rejection. It looked almost like anger, but not directed at her. "Did anyone hurt you?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that Eleanor blinked. "I survived. That is all that matters now." "That is not what I asked." Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His grip was gentle but firm. "Did anyone hurt you?" Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. No one had ever asked her that before, as if her pain mattered, as if she was more than just a fallen woman who deserved whatever happened to her. "Yes," she whispered. "Some men were cruel." Zachary's jaw clenched, and he looked away for a moment, visibly struggling with his emotions. When he turned back to her, his dark eyes blazed with an intensity that took her breath away. "Thank you for telling me the truth. That took courage. You do not have to be kind about this. I understand if you want nothing more to do with me. Eleanor, look around you." Zachary gestured at the harsh landscape surrounding them. "This is Arizona territory in 1882. Half the men in Nogales have killed someone, the other half have stolen something, and most of the women here have pasts they do not talk about. Do you think I care what you had to do to survive in San Francisco?" His hand tightened on hers. "What I care about is the woman standing in front of me right now. The woman who was brave enough to travel 2,000 miles for a chance at a better life. The woman who suggested practical improvements to my ranch and looked at my plain adobe house like it was a palace. That is who you are, Eleanor, not what happened to you in the past. But I was a prostitute." She forced the ugly word out, needing him to hear it plainly. "Respectable people do not marry women like me." "Then I guess I am not respectable." Zachary pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Our future starts right now together. Everything that came before, we leave it in the past. What matters is what we build from this moment forward. If you will have me, Eleanor Olivia Preston, I would be honored to make you my wife." Eleanor could not stop the tears anymore. They streamed down her face as she stared at this impossible man who was offering her not just acceptance but genuine respect and partnership. "You really mean that?" "I have never meant anything more in my life." Zachary brushed away her tears with his thumb. "I am not a rich man, and ranch life is hard work. But I promise you safety, respect, and a home where you belong. And if you give me time, I think I could give you love too. I am already halfway there." The confession undid her completely. Eleanor threw her arms around Zachary's neck and held on as if he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close, and they stood together in the desert heat while she soaked his shirt with tears of relief and hope, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously close to love. When Eleanor finally pulled back, Zachary was smiling down at her with such tenderness that her heart ached. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor managed. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Fletcher. Thank God." He kissed her forehead, a gentle, chaste kiss that promised more without demanding anything. "The preacher will be through Nogales again in 3 days. Is that enough time to prepare, or do you need longer? 3 days is perfect." They walked back to town hand in hand, and Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of her secret no longer pressed down on her shoulders. Zachary knew the worst of her past and wanted her anyway. It seemed like a miracle, the kind she had stopped believing in during those dark years in San Francisco. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henley proved to be a romantic at heart and enlisted every woman in Nogales to help with the wedding. Eleanor found herself caught up in a whirlwind of activity, altering a white dress that belonged to Mrs. Henley's daughter, baking cakes, preparing flowers. The women of Nogales asked no questions about her past, accepting her as one of them because Zachary Fletcher had chosen her. Zachary came to town each day, bringing small gifts: wildflowers from the ranch, a set of combs for her hair, a beautiful shawl woven by a Mexican woman who lived near his property. Each gift was chosen with thought and care, and Eleanor treasured them all. More than the gifts, she treasured the time they spent together, walking and talking, learning each other's histories and hopes. On the afternoon before the wedding, they sat on a bench outside the general store, watching the town go about its business. Zachary held her hand loosely, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "This time 3 weeks ago I was in San Francisco thinking my life was over. Now I am about to marry a good man and start a completely new life. It does not seem real." "It is real." Zachary raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "And I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret this choice. I could not regret it even if I tried." Eleanor looked at his strong profile, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the solid strength of his jaw. "Zachary, I need you to know something. What I told you about my past, that was the worst of it, but it was not all of it. I am not educated in the ways a proper wife should be. I can cook simple food and sew a straight seam, but I never learned to make fancy meals or do elaborate needlework. I have never run a household." "Good thing I am not a fancy man then." Zachary smiled at her. "Eleanor, I do not need a perfect wife, I need a partner. Someone to share the work and the decisions. Someone to talk to at the end of the day. I think you can be that person, and I hope I can be that person for you. You already are." That evening, Eleanor had supper with Mrs. Henley and several of the other women who had helped with preparations. They talked about married life with a frankness that made Eleanor blush, but underneath, the teasing was genuine kindness. These women were welcoming her into their circle, and Eleanor realized she was gaining not just a husband but a community. Later, alone in her room, Eleanor tried on the white dress one last time. It fit perfectly, the high collar and long sleeves modest and respectable. Looking at her reflection, she barely recognized herself. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by something brighter. Hope, she realized. And happiness. She was going to marry Zachary Fletcher tomorrow, and he knew the truth about her past and wanted her anyway. The wedding day dawned clear and hot, as all days did in Nogales. Eleanor dressed with shaking hands and Mrs. Henley helped arrange her hair and pin the small flowers that would serve as her bouquet. When she was ready, the older woman stepped back with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, dear. Zachary Fletcher is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Eleanor replied. The church was small and plain, but someone had decorated it with more wildflowers and bright fabric. The townspeople filed in, ranchers and miners and shopkeepers and their families, all come to witness the wedding. Eleanor stood at the back of the church, her heart pounding, until the preacher nodded and she began to walk down the aisle. Zachary stood at the front of the church, wearing his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed for once. But it was his expression that nearly stopped Eleanor in her tracks. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen, with wonder and joy and unmistakable love. Whatever doubt still lingered in her heart evaporated. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. When she reached his side, Zachary took her hand and whispered, "You are so beautiful." The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Zachary kissed her gently, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was held in the churchyard, with tables of food and a fiddler playing lively tunes. Eleanor was hugged by more people than she could count, all offering congratulations and welcome. Zachary never left her side, his hand always at her waist or holding hers as if afraid she might disappear. As the sun began to set, Zachary leaned down and murmured in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Fletcher?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, please." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon, now decorated with ribbons and tin cans tied to the back by well-meaning friends. The ride to the ranch felt both endless and too short. Eleanor was acutely aware of Zachary beside her, the solid warmth of him, the tension in his shoulders. They were married now, but they were still strangers in many ways. When they reached the ranch house, Zachary helped her down from the wagon and then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a slightly embarrassed smile and carried her over the threshold. Inside, someone had been there ahead of them. Candles were lit, and there was a simple supper laid out on the table. Zachary set Eleanor down gently and looked at her with sudden uncertainty. "I know I said I would not expect anything," he began, and Eleanor placed her fingers over his lips. "We are married now, Zachary. What happens between us is something we decide together." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to be your wife in every way. But I need you to understand something. My experience with men has not been gentle or loving. If you want this marriage to include the marriage bed, I need you to be patient with me." Zachary's eyes darkened with understanding and anger at the men who had hurt her, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "We have the rest of our lives, Eleanor. There is no rush. We can take all the time you need." The kindness in his words unlocked something in Eleanor's chest. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I know. That is why I am ready now, because I trust you." Zachary kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Eleanor felt heat kindle in her body that had nothing to do with the desert air. He was patient and careful, asking permission with his eyes before each touch, each kiss. When they finally came together as husband and wife in the larger bedroom that was now theirs, it was nothing like Eleanor's experiences in San Francisco. This was tender and passionate and real, a physical expression of the connection growing between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the desert beyond the window. Zachary held her close, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, more than all right. Eleanor pressed a kiss to his chest. "That was beautiful, Zachary. You are beautiful." She felt him smile against her hair. "I love you, Eleanor Fletcher. I know it is fast, but I do. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach looking so scared and brave at the same time." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I did not know I could feel this way about anyone." They talked for hours in the darkness, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Zachary told her about his childhood, the adventures he had with his father learning to run the ranch, his mother's garden that he had let die because he did not have the knowledge to maintain it. Eleanor shared her own childhood memories, the happy times before her parents died, her dreams of having a family of her own one day. When they finally slept, curled together in the big bed, Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. The past was behind her, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Eleanor threw herself into making the ranch house a home. She cleaned and organized, sewed curtains for the windows, started the vegetable garden she had mentioned. Zachary worked from dawn to dusk with the cattle and horses, but he always made time to check in with her, to share a meal, to talk about their days. The ranch hands accepted her readily. Robert taught her how to care for the chickens Zachary bought for her. Miguel shared his mother's recipes for Mexican dishes that could be made with simple ingredients. James said little, but he built her a beautiful workbench for the garden and seemed pleased when she thanked him profusely. In the evenings, after supper, Eleanor and Zachary would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the desert. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but always they were together. Eleanor loved those quiet moments, the sense of partnership and companionship. About a month after the wedding, Eleanor was working in her garden when a well-dressed woman drove up to the house in a fancy buggy. She climbed down with the help of a driver and approached Eleanor with a cool, assessing look. "You must be the new Mrs. Fletcher. I am Margaret Wilson. My husband owns the largest ranch in the territory." Eleanor wiped her dirty hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her work-worn dress and sun-bronzed skin. "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Would you like to come inside for some water? It is terribly hot. I cannot stay long." Margaret's eyes swept over the house and garden with barely concealed disapproval. "I came to introduce myself and to make you aware of the social expectations for ranchers' wives in this area. There are certain standards that must be maintained." Eleanor felt her hackles rise but kept her voice polite. "What kind of standards?" "Well, for one thing, ranchers' wives do not do menial labor. We have help for that. And there are proper social calls to make, charitable work with the church, maintaining appearances befitting our station." Margaret's thin lips pressed together. "I heard you arrived here as a mail-order bride with no family and no prospects. While that is regrettable, you are a Fletcher now, and the Fletcher name carries weight. You must not embarrass your husband." The words stung because they echoed Eleanor's own insecurities. But before she could formulate a response, Zachary's voice came from behind her. "My wife could never embarrass me, Mrs. Wilson." He walked up and put his arm around Eleanor's waist, pulling her close. "She works hard to build our home, and I am proud of everything she does. I do not recall asking for your opinion on how we run our household." Margaret's face flushed. "I was merely trying to help. A woman of her background might not understand the social expectations." "Her background is none of your concern." Zachary's voice was cold now, all the warmth gone. "My wife is a lady in every way that matters. If you cannot treat her with respect, you are not welcome on my property." "Well, I never," Margaret huffed, but she retreated to her buggy quickly. As she drove away, Eleanor heard her muttering about common folk who did not know their place. When the buggy disappeared from view, Eleanor turned to Zachary. "Did I just make you an enemy of the most powerful rancher in the territory?" "No, I did that myself, and I would do it again." Zachary tilted her face up to his. "Margaret Wilson is a bitter, small-minded woman who likes to make herself feel important by tearing others down. Do not give her words any weight. But what she said about my background—" "Eleanor." Zachary waited until she met his eyes. "I do not care about your background or what gossipy women think about our marriage. I care about you, about us, about the life we are building together. That is all that matters." Eleanor wrapped her arms around his waist and held tight. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I ask myself the same question every day." Zachary kissed the top of her head. "Now, is there any of that stew left from lunch? I am starving." The incident with Margaret Wilson was forgotten quickly in the rhythm of ranch life. Summer deepened into fall and the brutal heat eased slightly. Eleanor's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for the table. She learned to make cheese from the cow's milk and to preserve food for the winter months ahead. Zachary taught her to ride horseback, and she discovered she loved the freedom of galloping across the open range. Their physical relationship deepened too. What had started tentatively became confident and passionate. Eleanor learned that intimacy with someone you loved was a gift, not a transaction or an endurance test. Zachary was always considerate of her needs, making sure she found pleasure in their lovemaking. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, she would catch him looking at her with such desire and affection that it took her breath away. By October, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had always been irregular, so she waited to be sure before saying anything. When she finally confirmed it with Mrs. Henley, who had experience as a midwife, she could hardly contain her excitement. She planned a special supper for Zachary, making all his favorite foods. When they sat down to eat, she waited until he had finished before taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in here," she said simply. "Our baby. You are going to be a father, Zachary." The expression on his face was one she would remember for the rest of her life. Shock, joy, wonder, and love all mixed together. He pulled her into his lap and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though she could feel his joy in every line of his body. Happy does not begin to cover it. Zachary pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you so much, Eleanor. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more." "You gave me back my life," Eleanor replied. "You gave me hope and love and a future I never thought I could have. This baby is a gift for both of us." They sat together for a long time, talking about names and preparing a nursery and what kind of parents they wanted to be. The future that had seemed so uncertain just a few months ago now stretched ahead, bright with promise. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor had some sickness in the early months, but it passed quickly. Zachary hovered over her constantly, worried about every twinge and discomfort, until she finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. The ranch hands were excited too, already planning to teach the baby to ride and rope cattle. Winter came, mild by Ohio standards but cold enough to require fires in the evenings. Eleanor spent the shorter days sewing baby clothes and preparing the small bedroom as a nursery. Zachary surprised her by carving a beautiful cradle from mesquite wood, working on it in secret in the barn, and presenting it to her with bashful pride. As her belly grew round, Eleanor found herself thinking about her past less and less. It seemed like another life, something that had happened to a different person. When difficult memories did surface, Zachary was always there to hold her and remind her that she was safe, loved, and valued. His unwavering support healed wounds she had not even known she carried. In early March of 1883, Eleanor's pains began in the middle of the night. Zachary rode into town through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Henley while Robert stayed with Eleanor, keeping her calm and comfortable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Zachary held her hand through all of it, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement even when she screamed with pain. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, Eleanor gave one last tremendous push and heard the beautiful sound of a baby's cry. Mrs. Henley cleaned the infant quickly and placed him on Eleanor's chest. A boy, the midwife announced with satisfaction. A healthy, strong boy. Eleanor looked down at her son, at his tiny face and waving fists, and felt her heart expand impossibly. He was perfect. He was theirs. Beside her, Zachary was openly crying, his hand gentle on the baby's downy head. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked softly. "I always liked the name Thomas after my father," Zachary said, "but only if you approve, Thomas Fletcher." Eleanor tested the name and smiled. "It is perfect." "Hello, Thomas. We are your parents and we love you more than you will ever know." The next weeks were exhausting and magical in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby, but he needed constant care. Eleanor was grateful for Zachary's help, especially at night when the baby woke every few hours to nurse. Zachary would change Thomas's cloths and walk him around the room, singing softly until Eleanor was ready to feed him again. The ranch hands were completely smitten with the baby. Robert whittled toys for him. Miguel's mother sent over beautiful blankets she had woven. Even taciturn James could be found standing by the cradle, watching Thomas sleep with an expression of wonder. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor managed to balance caring for Thomas with her other responsibilities, though her garden was not as elaborate as the previous year. Zachary hired an additional hand to help with the increased workload, giving him more time to spend with his family. One evening, when Thomas was about 4 months old, Eleanor was sitting on the porch nursing him while Zachary sat beside her, watching the sunset. The baby's small hand wrapped around Eleanor's finger as he nursed, and she felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. "Do you ever think about San Francisco?" Zachary asked quietly. Eleanor considered the question. "Sometimes, but it does not hurt the way it used to. It is like something I read in a book, not something that actually happened to me. I am glad." Zachary reached over and stroked Thomas's soft hair. "I hate that you had to go through that, but I am grateful it led you here, to us. So am I." Eleanor looked at her husband, at the love and pride in his face as he gazed at their son. "You know what I think about most when I remember that time? I think about how close I came to giving up completely. There were days in San Francisco when I did not think I could survive one more hour, but something kept me going, some stubborn belief that things could get better. And then I saw your advertisement and it felt like fate. It was fate." Zachary leaned over and kissed her gently. "We were meant to find each other, Eleanor. I believe that with everything in me." Thomas finished nursing and Eleanor burped him, then handed him to Zachary so he could have his evening time with his son. She watched her husband walk around the porch, murmuring nonsense to the baby, and felt such love for both of them that tears sprang to her eyes. "I used to dream about a normal life," Eleanor said. "A husband who cared about me, children, a home where I belonged. But this is better than any dream I ever had. This is real and imperfect and more precious than anything I ever imagined." Zachary smiled at her over Thomas's head. "We are pretty fortunate, are not we? We built something good here, you and I. We did." Eleanor stood and joined them, wrapping her arms around Zachary's waist and looking down at their son's drowsy face. "And we are going to keep building it, for him, and for any other children we might have, and for ourselves." "Any other children?" Zachary's eyebrows rose hopefully. Eleanor laughed. "Maybe. Give me a year or two to recover from this one first." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, the Fletcher family stood together on their porch, surrounded by the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert. They had both come from difficult pasts, carried scars that would never fully fade, but together they had created something beautiful and enduring. The years that followed were full of the ordinary joys and struggles of ranch life. Thomas grew into a sturdy, happy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Eleanor did get pregnant again, about 2 years after Thomas was born, this time with a daughter they named Sarah after Zachary's mother. Then came another boy they named Daniel, and finally a second daughter, Lily. The ranch prospered under Zachary's careful management and Eleanor's practical suggestions. They built additional rooms onto the house to accommodate their growing family. Eleanor's garden became legendary in Nogales, producing abundant vegetables that she shared generously with neighbors. Zachary increased his herd and bought more land, becoming one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. Margaret Wilson never did warm to Eleanor, but most of the other ranchers' wives accepted her readily, especially after she helped organize a school in Nogales and volunteered to teach reading and writing to anyone who wanted to learn. Eleanor never spoke of her past to anyone except Zachary, but her actions spoke louder than any words. She was generous with her time, kind to those in need, and devoted to her family and community. Robert eventually retired from ranch work, but he stayed on in a small cabin Zachary built for him, becoming an honorary grandfather to the Fletcher children. Miguel got married to a girl from town and brought his wife to live on the ranch, and Zachary helped them build their own house on the property. James moved on after a few years, but he was replaced by other good men who became part of the extended Fletcher family. As the children grew, Eleanor made sure they understood the importance of compassion and second chances. She did not tell them the details of her past until they were old enough to understand, but when she finally did, they did not judge her. They saw only their mother, who had always been strong and loving and brave. Thomas, in particular, seemed to understand what a gift it was that his parents had found each other against such odds. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary surprised Eleanor by taking her back to Nogales for a special dinner at the restaurant where they had their first meal together. They left the children with Robert and Miguel's wife and spent the evening just the two of them, remembering how far they had come. "Do you have any regrets?" Zachary asked as they walked through town after dinner, hand in hand like young sweethearts. Eleanor thought about the question seriously. "Not about us. Never about us. Sometimes I wish I could have avoided the pain I went through in San Francisco, but if I had, I might never have found you. So even that, I cannot truly regret." "I used to worry," Zachary admitted, "that one day you would wake up and realize you had settled for a simple rancher when you could have had better. But you never did." "Settled?" Eleanor stopped and turned to face him. "Zachary Fletcher, I won the greatest prize in the world when you looked at me, really saw me with all my flaws and scars, and said our future starts right now. You gave me back my humanity when I had forgotten I deserved any. You are not second best to anyone." Zachary pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of town, not caring who saw. "I love you more every day, Eleanor. That is my truth. And I love you more every day. That is my truth." They returned to the ranch that night, and made love with the passion and tenderness that had only deepened over the years. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Eleanor thought about the terrified woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 10 years ago, certain that her past would destroy any chance at happiness. That woman had found not just acceptance but genuine love, not just a home but a family, not just survival but a life worth living. The years continued to pass in the way years do, with seasons turning and children growing and the inevitable changes that come with time. Arizona became a state, and Zachary served on the first state council, representing the ranchers in their area. Eleanor continued her teaching, expanding the school until it had a permanent building and a full-time teacher. Their children grew into fine young people, each finding their own paths while remaining connected to the ranch and family. Thomas inherited his father's love of the land and took over more of the ranch operations as Zachary grew older. Sarah became a teacher, carrying on her mother's passion for education. Daniel studied veterinary medicine and returned to Nogales to care for the animals of the area. Lily, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a journalist, traveling throughout the West to document the changing times but always returning home to the ranch. When Zachary and Eleanor's children married and had children of their own, the ranch house rang with the sounds of grandchildren playing. Eleanor delighted in her role as grandmother, spoiling the little ones while their parents pretended to disapprove. Zachary built a larger porch so the whole family could gather for Sunday dinners, and those meals became legendary, full of laughter and storytelling and love. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered to celebrate. There were toasts and speeches, and Thomas stood to say words that made both his parents weep. "Our father taught us the value of hard work and integrity," Thomas said, raising his glass. "But our mother taught us something even more important, that our past does not define us, and that everyone deserves a second chance. She taught us to see people for who they are, not where they came from. In a world that can be harsh and judgmental, that lesson has made all the difference." Eleanor looked around at the faces of her family, at the life she and Zachary had built together, and felt such gratitude she could hardly breathe. These people existed because a lonely rancher had taken a chance on a broken woman and offered her a future. Because he had looked past her past and seen the person she could become. Because he had loved her when she could not love herself. As the celebration wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, Eleanor and Zachary slipped away to their bedroom. They had moved to a smaller room when Thomas and his family took over the main house, but Eleanor did not mind. Wherever Zachary was, that was home. 25 years, Zachary marveled, holding her close, and I would do it all again without changing a thing, even the hard parts. Eleanor asked, "Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." Zachary kissed her forehead. "Do you remember what I told you that day you confessed your past? I said our future starts right now together." I remember everything about that day. I meant it then and I mean it now. Every day with you is a new beginning, Eleanor. Every morning I wake up next to you is a gift I never take for granted." Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I used to think I did not deserve happiness. That what happened to me in San Francisco was some kind of divine punishment for sins I did not even know I had committed. But you showed me that was not true. You showed me that I deserved love and respect and a good life just as much as anyone else. Because you did. You do." Zachary's arms tightened around her. "You are the strongest person I know, Eleanor Fletcher. You survived things that would have broken other people, and you did not just survive. You thrived. You built a life and raised a family and helped a whole community. That is not the story of someone who deserves punishment. That is the story of someone who deserves to be celebrated. They talked late into the night, as they had so many times over the years, sharing memories and dreams and the comfortable intimacy of two people who knew each other completely. When they finally slept, it was with the peace of knowing they had built something lasting and true. The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. Zachary and Eleanor transitioned fully into their roles as grandparents and community elders. They traveled occasionally, visiting places they had only read about, but they always returned eagerly to the ranch and family. The desert that had seemed so harsh and forbidding when Eleanor first arrived had become as dear to her as any place could be. This was her home, these were her people, and she had earned every bit of it. When Zachary fell ill in their 37th year of marriage, Eleanor nursed him with the same dedication he had shown her through 4 pregnancies and various illnesses. The doctors said it was his heart, worn out from decades of hard work and hard living. Eleanor refused to accept that at first, insisting he would recover. But as the weeks passed and Zachary grew weaker, she had to face reality. Their children gathered, bringing the grandchildren, and the house was once again full of family. Zachary held court from his bed, dispensing wisdom and bad jokes in equal measure, making sure each person knew how much they were loved. But his private moments belonged to Eleanor. "I am not afraid," Zachary told her one evening as they sat together in the twilight. "I have lived a good life. I have loved and been loved. I have seen my children grow and my grandchildren thrive. I have no regrets, Eleanor." "Do not talk like that," Eleanor said fiercely, though tears streamed down her face. "You are going to get better. You have to get better. I am not ready to lose you. My darling, we have had 37 years together. 37 years more than either of us expected when we met. That is not a tragedy. That is a triumph." Zachary reached up with trembling hands to cup her face. "Promise me you will not mourn too long. Promise me you will keep living, keep being part of the children's lives, keep teaching and helping and being the amazing woman you are." "I promise," Eleanor whispered, though she could not imagine life without him. "One more thing." Zachary's eyes, still so full of love despite his failing body, held hers. "Thank you. Thank you for getting on that stagecoach all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth. Thank you for marrying me and loving me and building this beautiful life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Fletcher, and I will love you beyond death and into whatever comes after." Eleanor laid her head on his chest, listening to his labored heartbeat. "And I will love you the same. You saved me, Zachary. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," he corrected softly. "That is what love does." Zachary Fletcher died 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Eleanor holding his hand. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona, people coming from miles around to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved throughout the territory. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's integrity, generosity, and unwavering love for his family. Eleanor stood at the graveside, flanked by her children, and watched as they lowered Zachary into the earth of the ranch he had loved. She did not cry. She had cried enough in the days before. Now she stood strong, honoring the man who had taught her what strength really meant. In the months that followed, Eleanor learned to navigate life without her partner. It was harder than anything she had endured, harder even than San Francisco, because now she knew what she had lost. But she kept her promise to Zachary. She remained active in the community, taught reading to the children and adults who wanted to learn, and stayed deeply involved in her children's and grandchildren's lives. Thomas tried to get her to move into the main house, but Eleanor refused. She stayed in the small room she had shared with Zachary, surrounded by memories of their life together. Every evening she sat on the porch and watched the sunset, talking to Zachary as if he was still beside her, telling him about her day and the family news. Life continued, as it always does. The grandchildren grew, and some of them married, bringing great-grandchildren into the world. Eleanor lived to see the ranch prosper under Thomas's management, to see Sarah publish a book about teaching in the West, to see Daniel become the most respected veterinarian in 3 territories, to see Lily's journalism recognized with national awards. She lived to see automobiles replace wagons, electricity come to even remote ranches, and Arizona grow from a rough territory into a thriving state. On what would have been her 45th wedding anniversary, Eleanor's family gathered at the ranch to celebrate her 80th birthday. She sat in a place of honor, watching her enormous family laugh and talk and argue and make up, and felt such profound gratitude for the life she had lived. All of this, every single person here, existed because a rancher had believed in second chances, and a frightened woman had been brave enough to trust him. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor sat on the porch alone, wrapped in the shawl Zachary had given her so many years ago. She looked up at the stars, brilliant in the dark desert sky, and smiled. "We did well, did not we?" she said softly to the night air. "That scared girl who got off the stagecoach and the lonely rancher who took a chance on her. We built something beautiful, Zachary. Something that will last long after we are both gone." The wind rustled through the mesquite trees, and Eleanor chose to believe it was his answer. She sat there for a long time, remembering and grateful and at peace. Her past no longer haunted her. It was simply part of the story, the hard beginning that had led to the beautiful middle and the satisfying end. Eleanor Fletcher lived 2 more years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep, her children gathered to mourn but also to celebrate. They buried her next to Zachary on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Eleanor Olivia Fletcher, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher." Our future started with her. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Fletcher family, with the stories of Zachary and Eleanor told and retold until they became legend. The story of the mail-order bride who confessed her shameful past, and the rancher who said our future starts right now together, became a family touchstone, a reminder of the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. In the end, their story was not about the past that had tried to define Eleanor or the loneliness that had defined Zachary. It was about 2 broken people who found each other in a hard land and built something beautiful together. It was about choosing love over judgment, hope over despair, and the future over the past. It was about believing that no matter where someone has been, they deserve the chance to become who they are meant to be. And in that harsh, beautiful Arizona desert, under the endless sky, their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values. The Fletcher Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built when 2 people committed to facing the future together, no matter what the past had held. Their story was not a tragedy or a fairy tale. It was better than both. It was real, messy, difficult, joyful, and ultimately triumphant. It was the story of a mail-order bride and a rancher who took a chance on each other and built a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes, inspiring generations to come. The sun rose and set over the ranch for decades after Eleanor's death, but the love story lived on. Visitors to the small cemetery on the hillside often stopped at their graves, reading the simple headstones and wondering about the lives behind the dates. Some knew the story, passed down through family or community memory. Others simply felt the peace of the place, the sense that something important and good had happened here. And perhaps, On quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the mesquite trees, you could almost hear the echo of two voices talking and laughing on a porch, discussing the day's events and planning for tomorrow, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. Their future had started that day in Nogales when confession met acceptance, when fear met courage, when past met future and chose to let go. That was the true legacy of Zachary and Eleanor Fletcher. Not the land or the cattle or even the family, precious as those things were, but the simple, profound truth that love can redeem any past and create any future, as long as two people are willing to commit to it fully and completely. As long as they are willing to say together, "Our future starts right now."